a beautiful backdrop for all of us.
Exactly. Action. Yes.
One minute, okay, Tom?
Sure.
I was hoping for a few more bodies.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Oh, someone's got some terrible timing. Mom. Oh, I do have one thing real quick. I do not mind at all if you want to hurl tomatoes at me. Just follow it up with mozzarella cheese and bread. The other good news is I will not be telling jokes today.
I think we're going to have to start without them, Tom.
Their win.
Done?
Their win.
Yeah. So, you've already heard me say a couple words about Tom back in the main hall there just before lunch. Oh, and by the way, while it's on my mind, that's Sonia Milimaki there, right? Am I looking at my blind? Yeah, okay. You got glasses on, off? Yeah. Sonia will be here 12:30 tomorrow doing an excellent thing called local plant dietas. And dieting with master plants or other types of plants, for those of you that don't know, is actually a really important and really valuable part of working with ayahuasca. And the whole idea of dieting with local plants is sort of even a step beyond that. So that's going to be great, right here at 12:30 tomorrow with Sonia. Back to Tom. Not only is he a nutcase, he and I have a kind of a joke together. One time I called him a nefarious maniac. So now we just, anytime he texts me or something, he says, "Nefarious Stephen." But it's a good nefarious, right? So, slightly more seriously, Tom is truly, in my mind, he might blush at this, but he is one of the leading figures in the psychedelic renaissance. He really is. And he's working really hard. He's got a new book coming out from Inner Tradition, same publisher, next year, called Psychedelic Mysteries. Is it The Psychedelic Mysteries or just Psychedelic Mysteries?
I'm still fighting with the editor about that.
Okay. And then he's got another one in mind, which he's actually asked me to contribute to, more about how people are actually going to use these. So you're going to hear a lot more about Tom Hatsis. He was here last year as a main stage speaker, and enthusiastically received. He's a really rigorous historian who, as I mentioned before, studied Latin so that he could, study the primary sources. So if anybody comes along and says, "Well, cannabis was instrumental in the starting of Christianity," Tom can go, "Well, I don't know about that." So this is going to be great. Just one question that I have for you folks, or request, please. Would you please be back in the room by 1:15 sharp, because that's when we're going to start, and I'd really appreciate it if you could all be in there by then, okay? So I'm so glad to see you all here. I'm sorry there isn't room for everyone to sit down, although there is more floor space around here if you want to squeeze in and don't want to stand for the next 45 minutes. There definitely is. You can squeeze in. There's probably another 10 or 15 people could get in these areas. So, folks, welcome Tom. Whoa. Get the energy up here a little bit. You all know this song, right? Let me hear if you know. Mashed potatoes. This is how I warm up sometimes, sorry. Get nice and loose. This is how I wake up in the morning, too. Let me hear you spare play medicine. Come on, let me hear it. Ow! Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Now that the serious stuff is over with, let's get into some fun.
So Stephen said a couple of things about me, most of them lies, especially the compliments. However, he did say something accurate, which has to do with the nature of my book coming out next year, Psychedelic Mysteries. In this, I'm going to be looking into the long and rich tradition of psychedelic and entheogenic use in the West. The reason for this actually comes from a historical accident. During the 1960s, many of the leading thinkers believed that we didn't have traditions in the West. But we do, and when you, Stephen said, when you go and actually read the primary sources, you find all kinds of descriptions of these things, and I'm going to get into them now. First and foremost, I have to make a distinction, I guess second and second most, I have to make a distinction between magic and religion in the ancient world. We tend to think of them as sometimes the same thing, we can conflate them. But the ancients saw things very differently, and we don't ever want to throw our modern ideas onto the past, because then you're not doing the past justice. So, magic and religion, what separated these two ideas, other than legality, was that religion, all pagan religions are pretty basic. You ask the gods for something, and you give them something so they'll give it back to you. You make the right sacrifices, you say the right prayers, you light the right incenses, and you say the gods will then bestow success in business, love, war, whatever your desires might be. That's religion in the ancient world. Magic circumvented all of that. It put the magician in the god's seat. They did not ask the gods for permission. They used their own powers to manipulate divine energies. So that's a major difference in the ancient world, and it's going to make a difference in how these things were perceived, specifically by authority figures. Okay, because one of those things, religion, was very legal, and the other, magic, was very much illegal. Sometimes today, we tend to think that, maybe nobody here, but I'm from America, so we're a little slower than the rest of you. Some people tend to think that magic was perfectly acceptable in the ancient Greco-Roman world. The truth of the matter is, the ancient Greeks and Romans actually persecuted and condemned magic more than their later Christian counterparts did. Because with pagan law, you didn't have a choice. If you were caught practicing magic, you were executed. Christians at least had a bigoted alternative. You could convert. Better than being burned at the stake, I'm sure. So this variety, sorry, I wrote this like 10 minutes ago, so trying to do it off the top of my head, it's not working. So this variety that was so extensive in the ancient world, I came up with an analogy because it's kind of hard to pinpoint where or when people used psychedelics in their magic. Think of ancient psychedelics and magic the way people use cars today. Imagine in the year 3000, two historians are sitting down and they're discussing the kinds of ways people traveled in the 20th and early 21st century. And one historian says, oh, well, you know, they had things like bicycles, trains, and cars. And the other historian said, cars, what's this? This is years in the future, everybody's teleporting now, right? So she says, what do you mean cars? What is that? It's like, oh, well, it's this vehicle that people got in to go, you know, to things called stores. You know, now Amazon has taken everything over in the year 3000, so the historian says, well, what's this thing called a store? And the other historian says, well, there were all different kinds. There were clothing stores, there were bakeries, there were hardware stores. Oh, clothing stores? Where was the clothing store? Well, there wasn't just one clothing store. There was JCPenney's and Macy's and Pacific Somewhere and all these other. Magic worked the same way in the ancient world. There's no stereotype for how somebody would use psychedelics in magic any more than there's a stereotype for how you all use your cars every day. Does that make cool? Nailed it on the analogy. So back to the notes. The point of this talk and my book is to introduce some new terms into the psychedelic lexicon. One of the great things that happened in the 20th century was Humphrey Osmond coining the term psychedelic and Carl Ruck coining the term entheogen, what these terms did was take the conversation of psychedelics out of drug context and put them into more deeper context, like the way I'm sure everyone here uses them, except for me. I don't use that. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I'm going back to the notes. So, when I use the term psychedelic, I'm going to be using it as a noun. A psychedelic is a thing. I tend to use entheogen as an adverb, in the sense that you use a psychedelic entheogenically. So psychedelic for me is always the base term. It's what you do with it that makes it entheogenic or otherwise. So let's actually start there with that word entheogen, because I'm sure everyone here is familiar with that word, right? Generating divinity from within. Cool. So the thing about generating divinity from within, this is important linguistically, because in order for that to happen, it means that you're merging two things. So like the observer and observed merge. It's like two verses swirling in turn, perhaps like two ferns burnt now in one urn. It all came together. Sorry, I do that sometimes. I'll get back into regular mode. So that's entheogy, okay? Now what happens, however, if somebody is using psychedelics in a kind of context where they're not merging with this deity or anything like that, okay? So they're staying separate beings the way we're in this room all separate beings. My friend Luminar and I have a friend Esteban who is very fond of eating mushrooms and communicating with aliens. Now, even though mushrooms are involved, and even though it could be considered a spiritual experience, depending on how one defines spirituality, some people say it's immaterial to be spiritual, other people say, well, other dimensions could be spiritual, so however you want to define it, whatever. But there are mushrooms involved, there's communication with another worldly deity, and yet I don't find that to be entheogenic, because the aliens stay the aliens, and the Esteban stays the Esteban. So instead, I call this extheogenic. Generating divinities outside the self. And when you look at ceremonial magicians' magical treatises in medieval times, in the early modern period, Renaissance, they talk about things like invoking daemons. A daemon, we get demon from daemon, but a daemon is a neutral spirit. It's not necessarily evil. You could invoke a daemon to sink a ship at sea, or you could invoke a daemon to help an elderly person cross the street with groceries. It all depended on how you did it, or what you did with it. So you have people talking about communicating with angels, communicating with demons, all these otherworldly entities that they are not becoming part of. Therefore, I call it extheogenic. The next term, let's see, extheogenic. So in my book, The Witch's Ointment, which I have here, I actually made a mistake in terminology because the term I'm about to say didn't exist when I wrote it at first. This term for this specific kind of experience has to do with generating the goddesses and gods in sleep. Taking something powerful like maybe opium, mandrake, henbane, and falling into a very deep but lucid sleep and communicating with the goddesses or gods. I theorize, and I hope I made a good case in my book, that I believe that this form of taking a soporific to enter the spirit realm is actually the oldest form of psychedelia that there is. I base this off of the research of an anthropologist named Edward Tyler, if anyone is familiar with him. Tyler theorized that our proto-human ancestors' first encounter with other realms was in the dream realm. That was the first immaterial experience they ever had, was in their dreams. Now, going on, how would a person react if they saw a deceased relative in a dream? What would they think about that? They might think that this person just went to this other realm and this is where they are and they're accessed through sleep, right? I mean, the last time we saw this person, well, she was just laying there. She looked like she was sleeping, right? Well, she was dead, but she looked like she was sleeping. So I theorize that the first psychedelics to bring people to that otherworldly place were things that would knock you out cold, like opium, mandrake, henbane. I call these the somnotheogens, generating the gods in dreams. Getting back to my error in the witch's ointment, I call the experience that these wise women were having entheogenic. I no longer believe that to be true because at no point did any of these women believe that they were merging with these various fertility goddesses. The fertility goddess, who went by many names, Holda, Bertha, Pertha, Epiphania, Frau Holt, Frau Held, Domina Bondia, Ben Socia, whatever, stayed the goddess, and the wise woman stayed the wise woman. For me, that's not entheogenic, and because it happened in the dream realm and not in the waking realm, it's not extheogenic either, it's somnotheogenic. Cool. Am I going too fast? I am a guinea from New York, so I do tend to talk fast. Cool, sorry. But I have been working on it. I live in Portland now with civilized people. It's fine. So, there were other ways, of course, of having these spiritual experiences that were done in these large group revelries. Perhaps the most famous are the rites of Eleusis in ancient Greece, where people would have a vision of the risen Kore. She would die as Persephone and be risen as Kore. The kykion that was drunk, that was the sacrament that they took, which was what contained the psychedelic in it. However, everyone was still awake when they had this vision of the goddess, so it can't be somnotheogenic. Nobody thought for a moment that they were taking Persephone, Kore into themselves, so it can't be entheogenic either. It's not extheogenic because you're not manipulating these a variety of entities. There's only one Kore who's going to rise, and it's all done in a very specific kind of set and setting. So I call this use of having a vision of a goddess in a religious setting like that a mystheogen, generating the goddess in mystery religions. And there's all kinds of evidence for this. There's obviously, like I said, the rites of Eleusis. There were also the rites of Trophamus. There was also the cult of Hera. There was also the cult of Artemis Hecate. All of these used psychedelics. In fact, Pausanias, who is a Greek geographer and traveler, writes about the worshippers of Hera using cannabis in their ceremonies. So we actually know that that's what they were using. He calls it asterion, which is the old Greek word for cannabis. It means little star because they thought the leaves looked like a little star. So that's mystheogens. After that we have, so now sometimes people use these kinds of substances to generate visions in people, but for maleficent purposes or selfish purposes, or purposes other than having a kind of spiritual experience. Okay, these I call the Pytheogens. This is using psychedelics to generating magic, I should say, excuse me, with psychedelics. Pythia from the ancient Greek, python from magic. We get python, the snake, from that as well. So with a pytheogen, there were many different ways of using pytheogens, of kind of driving somebody crazy, or they would call it bewitchment, or love magic. In fact, Caligula had drunk a love potion. They called it Pocalamatoria at the time in Latin. It just means love cup. And he went out to the beach and just had this whole conversation with the ocean because he was tripping balls. And, oh wait, no, we're academic. He was under the influence. No, he was tripping balls. That was what was going on. That was what was happening. So you have that. That was love magic gone wrong. Okay. People would often the idea behind love magic was you would give somebody a drug and they would become addicted to it, and through that addicted to their supplier. So if you wanted to keep a lady around or a man around, you would dose them with something like opium or cannabis or mushrooms, and they'd have a real good time of it, and you would withhold it from them if they ever, if they were ever, if they ever cheated. Wow, I can't talk this morning. So that was one of the ways that they were used. But you had to be careful. There was a guy named Cristobal de Acosta who had warned people. He said that, he was talking about men at the time, and he said that referring to opium, smart men should not take opium in their love potions, because smart men have big imaginations, and opium really pushes the imagination so much that he's going to get off too fast and the woman will not be pleased. However, if you happen to be a more insipid man, you should use opium so that you might possibly have a semblance of an imagination and actually please your lady for the first time in her life. So you had to be careful. That was how love magic worked. It was just this way of addicting something. Another one I reference actually in The Witch's Arm. In fact, my book is mostly about this lady, an Italian wise woman living in Italy in the early 1400s named Matteuccia de Francesca la Strega de Casarebbionca. And she had one of her most popular smells. She was a love magic specialist. And she would sell battered and abused housewives a drug. We don't know what kind of drug it was, but she would sell them something that really, messed with them. So the wife would slip the drug in her husband's food, wait about 45 minutes to an hour, and just when he started to feel the effects of it, maybe sweating, a little bit of vertigo, dizziness, but just before the hallucinations kicked in, the wife was instructed to say an incantation over her husband, who was cowering in the corner from these physiological, psychological reactions from the drug. Now, he would think that her incantation was causing this, because he didn't know he'd been slipped a drug. And that would cause him to behave himself later in life, because any time she said this, he believed he was going to have these reactions. But, it's at the time, though, for most women, that was the only retribution you were going to have. If somebody was being abusive to you, is you sought out a wise woman and she kicked his ass for you. Like, it was, no, that's all, it's good. I think we could use that today, no? The notes! I'm a virgin, you all applauded. Vision, the Theogens. So, I went over those. So, we were talking about, with love magic and firing the imagination and using opium. So that's going to bring me to my last term today. Does anybody here deny for one moment that the use of psychedelics fires the creative imagination? One in the back. That's okay, you're just wrong. Okay, so we all agree, right, that psychedelics fire. Okay, what's the word for that? For using a psychedelic to fire the creative imagination. Inspiration already exists, though, and you can be inspired without a psychedelic. Well, there isn't a word for that. So I made one up. Just so we can get that word is a poetogen. Using a psychedelic to fire creativity. One of the earliest expressions of this is in the famous Tassili caves in Algeria, the one where the shaman's holding the mushrooms. It's like one of those rare treats where it's like, no? Shaking head? No? Not holding mushrooms? I was talking to you. No? Okay.
Just a hallucination.
Oh, that's what it was. Got it. I don't know, it's really cool because a lot of times people like to pretend that there are mushrooms in paintings when there aren't. But in this one there actually is, so it's really cool. And so that, I think, was inspired poetogenically. Also, you have great works of literature. Confessions of an English Opium Eater by Thomas de Quincey. Fitzhugh Ludlow's The Hashish Eater. Balzac was a member of the Club des Assassins and numerous other writers at the time. So these I call the Theogens. Entheogen, Poetogen, Mistheogen, and all the other ones. No, Pythiagen and Somnotheogen. And I'm really curious about everybody's thoughts on this, and if the kind of thing they would be interested in, bringing up in conversations later, or coming with your own word. Like, I'm not wed to any of these. I just feel like we have to have a vocabulary to take these conversations into broader areas. Because that's what the term psychedelic and entheogen did in the first place. They allowed us to talk about these deep, wonderful spiritual experiences without some asshole saying you're just on drugs. Like, no, that was a good thing, so now let's bring that conversation out more. And that's what I'm hoping will happen with my next book. I also have my one here on time. It's here on time, of course. So if everyone could do me a favor, or not, it's okay, but I already had to lie to customs once coming here. So I don't want to lie to them again. So even if you know somebody that would like that book and they don't have the $20 for it, I'm more than happy to work out a deal. One final thing, sorry, and then we'll go into questions. I had one last one that I actually just came up with this morning. I call it, and it's because I just came up with it, an impogen. An impogen is when you do something stupid like what I like to do, which is take psychedelics and go do dumb shit that you're not supposed to do, mostly against the law. So, if anyone is interested, I'm going to end with a brief anecdote, then we'll open up to some Q&A. In order to get up here to Canada, I had to go get myself a passport, obviously, and I decided to, in my impogenic ways or whatever at the time, that I was going to eat some mushrooms and walk into a government office and get my passport done. Now, believe it or not, that's not the best idea. So I'm sitting there, they're trying to take a picture now of me for the thing. Now, I did not notice at the time, but for government-issued IDs, you have to have a neutral face. But I couldn't help but smile because I was on mushroom. So they took a whole bunch of pictures, and they eventually had to bring in a team, a panel, to determine the smileness of my picture because I couldn't help smiling because it became a joke that they didn't want me to smile and I was tripping too hard and I couldn't. So, if anyone is interested in seeing the world's first government document of a man trying not to smile while on mushrooms, I have it here. With that, I'd like to open it up to some Q&A. Oh, good. Sir, I'm your witness.
Tom, did you have that headgear on when you were getting your photo and the passport on?
No.
I heard you last year,
And still you showed up.
and I think you talked mostly about Middle Europe and Southern Europe. I'm just wondering if you've done any work on Northern Europe, because my ancestry is from there, so I'm interested.
Whereabouts?
Denmark.
Denmark. Yeah, they had some like the same kinds of stuff going on in Denmark that they had in other parts of Western Europe. I haven't looked too deeply into Denmark only because the stereotype that formed around witches formed mostly in the areas, the borders between France, Italy, and the Germanic lands at the time. And what my book tries to do, I hope, is show how that stereotype formed. We call it source criticism. It's when you look at an ancient text and you know that they're totally full of shit, and you try to pick out the source for each lie. So that's what that book is. It's trying to unravel all the lies said about wise women who were worshiping fertility goddesses and why the church demonized them as Satanists. If that answers your question, probably didn't at all. Question? Yes?
So you think, are you finding that a historical view, looking back at the texts and all that, is giving more legitimacy to psychedelics and giving it more credit? Is that why you're working so hard?
Excellent question. The question was, looking back in these records, does it help legitimize psychedelics today? And I thank you so much for asking that, because one of the things I wanted to do with both the Witch's Ointment and Psychedelic Mysteries was exactly that. In America, because of the my country, America, we have a First Amendment which gives you freedom of religion. So the Native American Church can use peyote, the Santo Daime Church can use Santo Daime, because it's protected under their religious freedom. I am Greek. Where are my rights to a right to Eleusis? So yes, that's one of the things I do want to show, that we have a very rich Western tradition. Psychedelics is a global phenomenon, as everybody here knows. So it's just to kind of show that. Anyone else? Yes?
Did you run across any examples of entheogens being used for diagnosis?
For?
Diagnosis of illnesses?
No.
Okay.
No, they didn't really use them that way. It's odd because even things that are technically entheogenic, they didn't use them. If I could give a quick example. So in ancient Egypt, you could go to one or two temples of Isis and they would give you opium if you were sick. Now we know opium today for its medicinal and pain-killing properties, but that's not how they used it medicinally in Egypt. They used it medicinally to knock you out so that you could meet Isis in dreams, somnotheogenically, and she would heal you in your dreams. So it's medical magic. you know? So that was one of the more interesting things I discovered, because you see in a recipe opium, and we just assume that they used it the way we did, but they didn't. They used it for its more visionary medicine than its pain-killing attributes. Over here there was a
Yeah, I had a question.
Sure.
You kind of gave me a whole bunch of terms to work with, and I see like some parallels between like, I guess, does it depend on the intention behind the drug that you're taking?
Yes! There is absolutely no entheogen without intention.
Right. And so is there potential for crossover between, like, maybe if you're having an entheogenic experience and then you have a bit of an inputgenic experience? Like,
Oh yeah, of course. Oh yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I'm still really playing with all these terms. So it can be, I mean, they could go to all different kinds of realms. I don't know. I'm just trying to put something out there because there were all these ideas circulating, and I just feel like we need to have a more extended, a conversation can only go as far as the vocabulary that houses it. So the more vocabulary we have for it, the more we can expand the conversation.
Just expanding on that, how do we get acceptance for it? Like, this is so, we need it so badly to have the language around all of this that is missing, so that we can't go deeper right now with it.
So that, I'm sorry.
Well, how do you get the acceptance of it? Like, because you said that you have terms, like you can come up with terms for different types of experiences. How does, now what is the next step though? Like, how do you get acceptance on the terminology so that there can be the deeper conversation?
They're all going to be in my forthcoming book.
In the bigger group of researchers that are doing it right now, like, is there consensus?
Just you?
with it, or
No.
do you guys-
Actually, Carl Rutt, the guy who coined the word entheogen,
Yeah.
absolutely hates all of these terms.
Or he does?
I asked him personally. Yeah, he hates them.
But
but that's okay.
It's needed so badly to have terminology around all of it.
That's the
To have the discussions.
Yeah,
to have
that's
the discussions
exactly
go.
because we couldn't talk about the use of psychedelics and mystery rites until a word like entheogen came along. Because again, it was just, oh, you're just on drugs, you know, and that's all that is. So what I'm hoping is just people. What's that? You gave me 5 stars?
We'll give you 10 stars, but
5
start,
minutes.
yeah, 5
Oh, okay, sure. I just I think that it. Wait a minute. Rewind. So what I'm hoping is people will use them in conversations and just like just talking to people. It's like, oh, you know, I took some LSD and I was very inspired to paint. You know, I saw this guy dressed like an asshole. He called that a poetogen. And you know what I mean? Like to just, you know, and just be like, oh, what's that? It's like, oh, well.
I do have one suggestion of going on the psychedelic podcast circuit with it.
Oh, I haven't.
Okay, just to get these that.
Oh yeah, I've been.
Talking about it.
Yeah, I just did one for Conscious Living Radio actually with Steven. We went over that. We have probably 5 minutes and 30 seconds left. So any other
Why did you
questions?
dislike that word? Why did you dislike your language? The person who came up with the term, what was his resistance?
How are your editing skills?
Oh.
No, because well, there was one thing that linguistically he did point out to me that I agree with him about, is that sometimes I had Theo in all of them. So it was originally Pytheogen instead of Pytheogen. And Ruck and I agree with him, it's like, well, but if it's magic, you're not always communicating with the god, so you have to get the Theo out of there. You know, same thing with poetogen. Like I go over all this in the first chapter, intro, then the first chapter of the book. It gets into, it's the most boring chapter in an otherwise very boring book. But it goes over, you know, just the language of it all. If people are into languages.
I was just wondering if there was a real reason why he was resistant to it.
Thank you. No, I don't know. I think it was just that he never really gave me a big explanation for it. Anyone else?
Tom, thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you.